Hello, and welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Media. I am your host, Emily, and today we are going to be talking about the life of Chuck. Mike Flanagan has once again stepped back into the realm of adapting Stephen King's work, but this time, instead of trying out one of the horror stories like Dr. Sleep, Flanagan has attempted to take on one of Stephen King's more life affirming, sort of feel good short stories in the form of The Life of Chuck. Before I get into this movie and what's so great about it, I do kind of want to clear the air around an aspect of this movie that might turn some people off, which is that it's very weird. There's a sort of connotation to movies doing weird things with structuring and pacing and that kind of thing as being pretentious. You see jokes about it, like film Twitter movies are like a six-act story told out of order that's all in black and white or whatever the hell. And The Life of Chuck does do unusual things with its structure. It's theoretically told in reverse, with the beginning of the movie talking about the end of the title character's life and then following him backwards to understand the sort of his adulthood and then finally his childhood. And why I want to clear the air about this and why I want to bring it up is that the movie is not really doing a sort of pretentious art house film thing with this. It is and it isn't. But really what the purpose of this structure is it's going to tell three different short stories about the same character. Are they connected? Yes. But do they function freestanding? Absolutely. And it's important to note this because I do actually think it's one of the film's key strengths that it's able to pull this off. The Life of Chuck is three very independently entertaining and meaningful short films. And when they all come together, it tells a much larger and even more powerful story using aspects of all three. I don't want to get into too many spoilers, especially because I think that the film's first, sort of 30 odd minutes really are best experienced blind. The whole movie is honestly best experienced blind, but especially that opening. So I want to talk about some spoiler-free stuff first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the meat of each act, which acts worked better than others, and that kind of stuff. One thing to say about this movie is that despite the advertising heavily featuring Tom Hiddleston, this movie is much more of an ensemble cast. Because it's three short stories, all of which have different characters. Hiddleston himself is actually only really in one and a half of them. This movie has a rotating cast of character actors, including but not limited to Mark Hamill, who does an absolutely bang-up job in the role that he was given to play. Karen Gillan does a absolutely fantastic job alongside Chiwetel Ejiofor, who is absolutely fantastic in the act that he is present in. And tons of side characters are also randomly played by famous people, like Matthew Lillard and David Dalmastian, who both show up to do bit parts in this movie. They're very fun. So I wanted to call attention to that because while this movie employs a huge rotating cast of actors, I personally thought that all of the performances were fantastic. Even the kids in this movie do a great job. I'm not usually a huge fan of child actors. I find that they can have a tendency to sort of kill a scene. But between this and The Monkey, I'm starting to think that child actors in Stephen King movies might actually be okay. So that's a pretty big win. The kid who plays the younger version of Chuck in this movie does a really bang up job. So I wanted to call attention to that because I was impressed. Beyond that, the real thing to know about this movie, the reason that I like it and the reason that I'm going to recommend it before we move on to spoilers a little bit more in depth, is that this is a movie that really wants to be emotional. It cares about making you feel something. And I was impressed by how successfully it managed to do that. I'm not typically a person who necessarily enjoys being emotionally baited or manipulated by films. There are some times when a movie or a show is trying to make you feel something and it will employ cheap tactics to spark emotion that it hasn't really earned. And what I appreciate about The Life of Chuck is that in no sense does it fall into this trapping ever. Everything that I felt about this movie was earned by the tone, writing, pacing, and performances. And so when it does go for those moments where it obviously wants you to be emotional, I was willing to be on the movie's wavelength because I felt like I had earned it. I was engaged enough that the emotions the movie was communicating really came across. And when you're doing a drama movie, that is oftentimes the biggest barrier to success when connecting with an audience. If you can make them feel what you want to feel, not by force, but because they want to feel it. If your audience is welcoming whatever you are asking them to feel, then you know you have made a successful movie. And in my opinion, The Life of Chuck is among the best of its contemporaries at sparking that exact kind of feeling. It's monumental and it feels monolithic when you're watching it. It feels alive and central and like it's beating at the center of the universe in a way that is just utterly fantastic. It's captivating, it's emotional, it's engaging, it's beautiful, and it's heartwarming. If that's the kind of movie that you like, I cannot recommend The Life of Chuck enough. You'll have a good time and you will come away from it having felt a lot of things, and that can be a really good thing. So now, if you have seen the movie and you want to hear my spoilered thoughts, or if you have no intention to see the movie and want to hear my spoilered thoughts, feel free to keep listening. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and please be sure to like and subscribe. So, to talk about the spoilers of this movie, it's got a lot going on. And immediately from the beginning of the movie, which is, of course, Act 3, you can tell that this movie has a lot up its sleeve just on the basis of how much shit goes down in that segment. This whole sort of pseudo-apocalypse where everything starts collapsing, which is ultimately later revealed to be a sort of dying hallucination of Chuck's brain, manifesting all of the different people that he knows and that he's met throughout his life, is really emotionally moving for a story about characters who we've been introduced to 15 minutes prior and barely know anything about. It really succeeds. The relationship between the two main actors in Karen Gillan and Chiwetel Ejiofor is believable. It's painful and emotionally vulnerable, and the payoff to it in that first segment is really excellently done. I remember telling the people I saw the movie with when I came out of it that I frankly would have watched a whole movie of just them, but the fact that there was so much more to it was like cherries on top of cherries on top of cherries, and I still feel that way. The movie hits this high note, but then in my opinion, it takes a little bit of a dive, not a lot. I do think Act 2 is the weakest of the three, but that's not necessarily its fault. It just kind of has the least going on. Chapter 3, the first thing that you see in the movie, but theoretically the end of the story, right? The end of Chuck's life, has that sort of emotional power to it with those performances by Gillan and Ejiofor. And the actual story of it and the apocalypse angle is really well executed on. And the first act, which is the last one that we see in the movie that details Chuck's childhood, is very emotionally involved and serves as a really good way to kind of be the main story of the movie. If I had to pick one of these that was a majority of the movie, it would be Act 1. Act 2 is sandwiched between them, and it is important. It does tell us things that will go on to be relevant in Act 1, so it's not like it couldn't be there. But it does feel a little bit more freestanding and a little bit more. Its purpose is not necessarily vague, but it's the least important of the three, narratively speaking. It mostly serves to set up a key aspect of Chuck's character, which will go on to be important in Act 1, but not really much more. I still liked it, but I do definitely think that it was the weakest of the three by a considerable margin. And the strongest of the three was for sure Act 1, which is a little bit unfair to say because, and admittedly I haven't looked up the runtime, so this is kind of an estimation, but Act 1 does take up a majority of the movie, and it definitely feels like it. Act 1 feels the most like this is what the movie was leading to. This was the story that it was trying to tell. And that really comes through in Mark Hamill's character, who is supposed to be Chuck's grandfather, who's an accountant. And after Chuck's grandmother dies and it's just the two of them, the relationship dynamic that the two characters develop and the things that they discuss is really powerful. It is impactful, and it was easily the thing that I felt the most emotional about. There's a particular monologue by Hamill about math that really resonated with me on a lot of levels, in which the grandfather character basically tells Chuck that despite him being passionate about dancing, which is like a key character trait about Chuck that we learn in Act 2 and is very relevant in Act 1, he shouldn't go on to make a career out of it because he'll get hurt. And if you love something that much and then you fail at it, that's just crushing. And Hamill's character kind of has this conversation with him that's like, you should love what you love and do what works. And it's interesting because it kind of hits at this sort of depression of mundanity, of accepting the lives that are the easiest for us to live and not acting on our passions, but it's not necessarily in a hopeless way. It's more so a soft crushing of dreams in a way that is very balanced and nuanced and difficult. And I was very impressed by the way that Flanagan handled it, and the way that Hamill acted it was just mesmerizing. It also hit very close to home for me because of some stuff that is a little bit too personal to get into in this review. But suffice it to say, I think that moment will remain as one of the most impactful moments for me of any movie that's come out this year. Suffice it to say, The Life of Chuck is brilliant. It's beautiful. It's haunting. It has amazing performances from a number of amazing actors. It's consistently very funny. David Dalmastian has a cameo in the very beginning, where he visits Chiwetel Ejiofor's character at a parent-teacher conference and complains about how since the internet has permanently gone down, he can no longer access Pornhub. And it's like a 2.5-minute rant about that particular website. And it's fucking hilarious. It lands so well, and he's just great, as is everyone else. So the fact that the movie can balance being that dramatic and emotional while simultaneously having laugh out loud funny moments like that is great, and exemplifies what I liked so much about this movie. There is some legit criticism of it that I will sort of float, which is that this movie is very, very, very close to the source material, which begs the question of why it needed to be adapted at all when this movie is essentially just an audiobook put to visual form. But I like what it does with the visuals. I actually really like Flanagan's direction, and I think he does a lot of really powerful stuff. So I don't necessarily agree with that criticism, but I will acknowledge that the movie is extraordinarily close to the original short story on which it was based. And if you find that to be somehow unoriginal or boring, then this may not be the movie for you. But generally speaking, I really love this movie. I had a great time with it, and it's something that I've recommended to pretty much everyone I know because I think almost anyone could watch this movie and have a good time with it. So if you're a person and you're listening to this review, go give The Life of Chuck a check. It's a good time. Thank you so much for watching. We always appreciate your patronage here on Million Dollar Media. Please like and subscribe to hear more content from us. We have a lot of cool stuff in the works, so make sure that you keep an eye out for that. If you are interested in following me specifically, you can find me on Twitch, where I do a little bit of streaming with my friends over on twitch.tv/MelvidRTV. So please enjoy that, have a good time, and we'll see you in the next video.